Now, people in the past had the same interest in having pets as people today, but they didn't necessarily have the same pets, and even the pets that they did have were slightly different than they are now. So what were the most popular pets in Iron Age Britain and Ireland? Now, a startling fact is that the English word pet may be of Gaelic origin. The word peta appears in Old Irish sources as early as the 7th century, but doesn't appear in English until around the 15th century. Now, the ultimate etymology of this word is actually unknown because it starts with a P, and Gaelic is a Q Celtic language. Exactly what its origins are somewhat mysterious. But nevertheless, it seems that it entered English likely through Scottish Gaelic, because it first appears in northern dialects of English and Scots. Now, by far the most common pet in the Iron Age was the dog. No surprises there, really. But what might surprise is just how common and beloved the dog was even then. Ancient Roman writer Tacitus, whose father-in-law served as a governor of Britain, named the hound as one of the chief exports of Britain, along with grain, slaves, cattle, iron, and silver. Dog breeders in Britain were actually exporting dogs throughout Europe and possibly even beyond. Now, these exported dogs were not being raised to be cuddly, of course, but as work animals, either in hunting, herding, and even for deployment in war. Their speed and strength was commented upon, and while it might be tempting to view these dogs as Irish wolfhounds, that breed is actually not very old in itself, but we may have some ancient depictions of what at least some of these dogs might have been like. So Oppian, writing in the 3rd century, said, "There is a strong breed of hunting dog, small in size but no less worthy of great praise. These the wild tribes of Britain rear and call by the name of Agassian. Their size is like that of the worthless and greedy domestic table dog, squat, emaciated, shaggy, dull of eye, but endowed with feet armed with powerful claws, and a mouth sharp with close-set venomous tearing teeth. It is by virtue of its nose, however, that the Agassian is most exalted, and for tracking it is the best there is, for it is very adept at discovering the tracks of things that walk upon the ground, and skilled too at marking the airborne scent." Now, Strabo too commented that the British dog was good for hunting, and that the Britons and Celts used them also in war. Many pre-Roman British coins feature dogs, especially coins produced under Cunobelin, whose name means strong hound. In fact, it was very typical in Celtic society for people to be named after the dog or hound, much as wolf names were very popular among Germanic people. Skeletal finds show that they generally had a shoulder height of between 29 and 58 centimeters, or for my American friends, about 12 to 22 inches. So we're not talking about massive dogs here, but they would have been somewhat similar to a border collie in height. Yet despite their relatively smaller size, they were renowned for being powerful hunters and fighters. Gratius, a Roman poet writing in the early 1st century, remarked, "What if you choose to penetrate even among the Britons? How great your reward! How great your gain beyond any outlays, if you are not bent on looks and deceptive graces. This is the one defect of the British whelp. At any rate, when serious work has come, when bravery must be shown, and the impetuous war god calls in the utmost hazard, then you could look not to admire the renowned Molassians so much." Now, the Molassian was the war dog breed of the ancient Greeks in Epirus. They were known for being very large, and they had the appearance of a mastiff. What Gratius implies is that the British dog, although not appearing nearly as impressive as the Molassian, was in fact the greater fighter, and the dog you would prefer to have at your side if your life was in danger. Now, to put that in perspective, the Molassian was typically 32 to 33 inches and 250 pounds. They were frequently used in the Roman Colosseum for fighting. Yet at least some people believed that the much smaller British dog could somehow surpass the Molassian in this regard. And it's quite hard to imagine, but these dogs were scrappy. Quintus Aurelius Symmachus, a Roman consul serving in the late 4th century, remarked in one of his letters that he'd received 7 dogs from the Scots as a gift for fighting against bears and lions, and that they amazed the people of Rome. Presumably, these dogs took on perhaps even beating these lions and bears. Celts of Britain and Ireland loved the dog. Many of the people were largely pastoral, so the dog was used to help herd and guard the flocks. And yet it was more than just a pet, or even a working animal. It was a religious symbol with real spiritual power. The god Lugh possesses the god of dogs, Valinish, meaning the island enclosure, a name which invokes the hound as the protector of all of the land. He's invincible in a fight. He can catch any prey, rules over all the other animals, and can turn water into wine. By night, he can appear in the form of a thunderbolt, the Caer Henna. He summons storm winds with the lifting of his tail. His lightning burns anything to ash. There are the 2 hounds of the champion Fin Makul, who, odd as it may sound, are actually his cousins on his mother's side. In local folklore, there is also the ghost hound known as the Cú Síl, which wanders around the moors and highlands, as large as a cow. A Welsh myth knows the Cú Nanúvin, the hounds of the underworld. Many votive offerings to the pagan gods in the Iron Age and Roman period take the form of dogs. There is also a mysterious practice of burying dead dogs in grain storage pits at the foundation of houses and even in wells. The purpose behind this appears to be the protective aspect of the hound. In death, the spirit of the hound will continue to guard the place from other spirit beings, which might cause harm. The evil spirits that cause the grain to rot, the evil spirits that poison the waters, or that cause harm to the home. Lugh's son, Cuchulainn, likewise vows to embody the quality of the protective hound of Cuchulainn, the smith, guarding the lands and possessions of the people of Ulster, after having been forced to kill Cuchulainn's hound. Now, this act brings us to the legal protection of dogs in ancient Celtic society. Early medieval Gaelic law, known as the Brehon law, established set criminal fines for the killing of dogs. Like with the murder of humans, the fine differed depending on the dog's role. A hunting dog, a guard dog, and a herding dog, or a lap dog, which was often a lady's personal pet. Now, for the killing of a guard dog, the penalty could be equivalent of 3 cows, or a cumul, and the replacement of the hound with one of equal or greater ability. So the story of Cuchulainn is actually the fulfilling of his legal obligation. The punishment for killing a woman's lapdog was also very specific. If she is in pregnancy or giving birth, the killer must provide for a priest, earlier a druid, to chant over her continually. Now, the reason seems to be tied to the power of the dog to repel the evil spirits from her, which might harm the baby or her during the birthing process. Yet dogs could also engage in behavior that would result in the owners being fined, attacking cattle, causing mischief, and even the dog defecating on another person's property. This was legal grounds to pursue a fine against the owner. So in the case of the defecation, the owner was required to clean up the mess entirely, cover the area with fresh soil, and then have 2 horses pulling a chariot graze the area with no piece of grass sticking to their teeth. Then the owner had to hand over 3 times the size of the dog's crap in butter, dough, and curds. And if the dog did this in the presence of its owner, then a fine for trespassing by the owner was also slapped on top of this. So you might have thought that laws like this were new, but as it turns out, the Gaels were actually extremely serious about their doggy bags and strict enforcers of property rights. Now today, many people love cats, and so did the early medieval peoples of Britain and Ireland. Yet prior to the Roman occupation of Britain, the evidence for domesticated cats is less obvious. There were wild cats, a small population of which still exists in Scotland, and likely some of these cats were domesticated and kept as pets and mice hunters. This can be seen in Ireland, where our earliest written sources attest to pet cats, and Brehon law deals with fines for the killing of cats. Now, while the killing of a prized mouser could be valued at that of a cow, most cats were only valued at bags of grain or equivalent to sheep. A Gaelic poem concerning a cat was written in the 9th century called Myself and Pangur Ban, though often translated as The Scholar and His Cat, the cat being named White Pangur, with Pangur likely meaning a fuller. Myself and Pangur Ban, each of us at his own art, his mind is always turned to hunting, mine to my own special trade. I love it quiet, better than fame, while eagerly studying my book. Pangur is not envious of me, he loves his own childish art. Towards the wall he points his bright and penetrating glare. Towards the keenness of knowledge I point my own clear but weak glare. He rejoices in dashing around when a mouse clings to his sharp claws. When I grasp a dark but dear problem, it is I myself who rejoice. Though we are like this all the time, no one disturbs the other. Each of us loves his art and is glad in it alone. The cat was highly valued for its art of mouse hunting. Mice could be a serious problem in ancient and medieval society. They robbed food stores and caused a nuisance in the home, as they still can today. But unlike today, there were no easy mouse traps to set up, and I'm unsure if there was widespread use of poison. The cat had an extensive job to do, keeping the mouse population down. In Welsh myth, the 3rd branch of the Mabinogi shows just how destructive these mice could be, carrying away the crops, perhaps sometimes believed to be instigated by a god, and likewise thwarted through divine action. But cats could also wind one up in trouble. The Book of Akil outlines several cases where cats could be exempt from such punishments, however. The exemption as regards a cat in the kitchen. That is, the cat is exempt from liability for eating food which he finds in the kitchen, owing to the negligence in taking care of it, but so that it was not taken from the security of a house or vessel. And if it was so taken, the case as regards the food is like that of a profitable worker with a weapon, and the case as regards the cat is like that of an idler without a weapon. And it is so justified to kill the cat in this case. So in other words, if the cat takes food that has been idly left out, that's the fault of the person who left it out. But if the cat is sneakily taking food which is stored away competently, then it amounts to thievery. What's very interesting is that the legal code actually covers animals in much the same way as it does people. Again, we see the idea in the Mabinogi of the Welsh, in a somewhat absurd scenario where Manawydan has captured a mouse and is vowing to uphold the law of thievery against the mouse by hanging it by the neck. While perhaps meant to be absurdly comical, it is in basic line with the ancient Celtic approach to the law, which appears to have dealt with animals legally in much the same manner as people. The exemption as regards a cat in mousing. That is, the cat is exempt from liability for injuring an idler in catching mice when mousing. And half fine is due for him for the profitable worker whom he may injure, and the excitement of his mousing takes the other half off him. So here we actually have a mitigating circumstance with the excitement of the cat being used as a justification for giving him a lesser punishment. So another pet that we can be fairly sure that ancient British and Irish people kept was the raven and or crow. Now there was no strong distinction made in our medieval sources between a raven and a crow. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always been interested in ravens and crows. I've liked observing them, and I've kind of always wished that I could have one as a pet, but it's not really allowed in Canada, unfortunately. Now, even before the time of the Celts, the raven was a bird of prophecy, with a special importance among people across the world. I recently spent some time among the Manchu in China, who likewise hold the crow as a sacred bird and believe that their founder Nurhaci was protected by crows when the Ming Dynasty hunted him through the forest, and the birds flew over top of his body and hid him from the soldiers. The Celts had very specific myths about the bird, believing that it could foretell victory, warn of times of hardship to come. An early medieval Gaelic text called the Fiacharacht, Raven Lore, describes how to interpret the various calls of the raven and what they mean. Yet we may have an even earlier source for a corvid being kept and used for issuing prophecies. In the Geography of Strabo, he records the following. On the coast, washed by the ocean, there is a harbor named Port of Two Crows, and that here 2 crows may be seen with their right wings white. Those who have any dispute, come here, and each one having placed a plank for himself on a lofty eminence, sprinkles crumbs thereupon. The birds fly to these, eat up the one, and scatter the other, and he whose crumbs are scattered gains the cause. Now, very likely these birds were being kept and maintained by a local druid who interpreted their behavior and made prophecies based on it. Though the raven or crow is likewise linked to war and death due to being a carrion bird, yet their importance clearly transcended this aspect. Ancient peoples recognized that these were highly intelligent birds, and that there was something about their behavior that was more akin to man. Odin's 2 ravens are called Thought and Memory, which expresses directly this very attribute. However, unlike dogs and cats, the raven or crow was likely most frequently kept by druids. Iconography from Gaul and Britain shows ravens in close company with numerous gods. Ravens are frequently shown connected to a god interpreted at times as Mercury and other times Mars, sometimes standing on either shoulder, whispering into his ear like Odin's ravens. In Gaelic myth, the Morrigan or Badhav, a goddess of war and fate, often appears in the form of a crow or raven, and in fact Badhav was one of the words for a scald crow. Raven figurines were placed atop priestly scepters in Roman Britain. Even more startling, ravens were carefully buried in pits in important sites in a similar manner and sometimes alongside dogs, showing a possible sacrificial offering or sacred burial of the deceased animal, which was conveying protective powers upon the location. Ravens, like parrots, can acquire the ability to reproduce human speech, and it's amazing to think that there were ancient ravens that were speaking an ancient Celtic language. Now, an even more unusual bird was also kept as a pet during the Iron Age, one you will probably never guess. The crane. Yes, it is hard to picture, but true. The crane may have been the third most popular pet in Iron Age Ireland. We know this not only from finds of their bones buried near Iron Age homes, but early Irish sources which directly attest to them being kept as pets, and also as working animals. They were, believe it or not, sometimes used as house guards. Rather than a guard dog, some people would have a guard crane. They can attack with their long beak, their wings and feet, and they also emit a very loud cry which would alert anyone nearby. Cranes, unlike herons or omnivores that can eat a wide range of things, would have been easy to feed, but they also eat mice, which in some cases they were used to catch. There are occasional references to them being larder cranes, which guarded the food stores from mice. The phrase cor margi, crane of the market, was used to refer to a market trader and possibly rabble, because cranes would gather around in markets, make noise, and scavenge for food, similar to seagulls today. Now, cranes were not eaten as food. In fact, it seems that there was a religious guess or taboo against them being eaten. Gerald of Wales records that the Irish during his time refused to eat crane meat and were shocked to see it being served at feasts of Henry II. There was something spiritual about the crane among the ancient Celts which forbade their eating. One sign of this is the representation in Gallo-Roman art. 3 cranes are found in association with a tree and a bull and a god sometimes called Essus. Sometimes the use of the name crane is somewhat mysterious. In Gaelic, Colmcille was referred to as the Cor Cleric, the crane cleric. There was also a class of druid or bard called the Corguna, who practiced a type of magic called the Corgunacht. This specific form of magic was glossed in Old Irish as Sciomantia, a Latin word for a form of divination involving spirits of the dead, or shadows. The god Lugh identifies as possessing this art when he attempts to enter Tara. Now, cor can mean crane in Gaelic, or it can mean a sharp point, so potentially it means either a crane wounder or point wounder. But there may be a real connection between the crane and this type of magic, which involves communing with the dead. Later folklore describes storks bringing babies. This can be interpreted as the bird coming from the world beyond, bringing life from the world of the dead. The crane was viewed as a liminal creature that crossed into the underworld, likely at least in part due to his connection with marshy regions. Possibly the name crane wounder is from a type of sacrifice of the bird in order to contact the dead, and the Shia of Mihir of Brile was said to have been guarded by 3 cranes. The North Cross, an early medieval Irish cross from Tipperary, shows a crane leading a procession on one side, while on the other side, the frieze continues as a funeral procession. The word Coranach in Gaelic means a dirge or lamentation. Possibly it's from Cor Ranach, meaning cry of the crane. Like with the raven, cranes have been found in ritual burials and their bones in contexts that suggest a ritual use, which transcends the scope of this video, but they were both pets and also significant animals involved in some ritualistic practices not now easily recoverable. Now, while perhaps not thought of as pets exactly, horses were of course kept and played a very important part in Iron Age British and Irish society. They were used for riding, pulling chariots, and farm labor, and they were also an important symbol of status. Killing a horse could carry a very large fine indeed. In the Tan, Medivh and Alil both have horses said to be worth a cummal, a unit of value, the equivalent of a female slave. Yet there was likewise an air of mysticism around the figure of the horse. The various gods and goddesses seem to have been archaically conceptualized as a horse. The goddess Macha wins a race against King Chonhavar's horses, as she gives birth to foals at the end, suggesting that her original nature was as a horse rather than a woman. One of the common names of the Dagda is Echith, based on the root Ech, meaning horse. Now sometimes the name is translated as horseman, but it's probable that the archaic name simply refers to a horse god. In the Battle of Mugturit, the daughter of Indech demands to ride on his back, as if he were a horse, and he obliges. Lugh is said to be the inventor of horseback riding, horse racing, and horse combat, and his armor is sometimes depicted as horse armor. Horses that were good at jumping were called Lugh Lemnach, Lugh jumpers. Cuchulainn, his son, is born at the same time as two foals, and in Welsh myth, Rhiannon, whose name means queen, is punished when it's thought that she murdered her own son, and has to give rides on her back as if she were a horse as punishment. Her son Pryderi appears in the stable on the night a foal is born. Iron Age Celtic coins give artistic expression to this association between the horse and the divine. The gods are frequently depicted not only riding horses, but as horses. And sometimes the horses will be pictured with humanistic heads. They were, among other things, the symbol of the sovereign power of the land, likely the reason figures like Rhiannon and Macha have horse forms. Gerald of Wales recorded that Irish kings in some parts of Ireland were still being crowned with pagan rites in his day. A mare would be ceremonially wed to the king, sacrificed, chopped into pieces, boiled into a broth, and the king would sit in that broth and dish it out to his people. His marriage with the horse is his marriage with the land, with the sovereignty of the kingship. The horse must be sacrificed in order to secure the king's connection to it. There was likewise a requirement in Brehon laws regarding the claiming of land, that the person claiming it had to bring a certain number of horses and stay on the land for a certain length of time. And of course, in some periods in Britain, seemingly under Gaulish influence, there were so-called chariot burials, with the horses and chariots acting as the vehicles of the king on his way to the other world. Now, of course, there are many other animals that were kept during the Iron Age, but most of them I would consider to be stock animals rather than pets. Potentially, there were other animals that were kept, like badgers are one case where I think there might have been some individuals who kept them, and they appear to be a cult animal of certain people as well. The name Tag, for instance, comes from the word for badger archaically, and comes to mean poet, interestingly, which we'll have to save for another time. So I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon, PayPal, or through YouTube Super Stickers. Your support helps me to make videos like this. Thank you all for watching. Thanks especially to my supporters who helped make it happen. And as always, stand tall.